Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Thanks for waiting. Thanks for your patience. I'm here today with three of Virgil's very good friends. You just pushed the thing up. So we're going to keep it friendly, keep it casual. I'd say at some point, Virgil has referred to all three of these people in conversation as some variation of masters, senseis, purists. I'm here with Acyde, Benji B, and Devon Turnbull. I think I'll start with a question that also forces you guys to introduce yourself, if that's cool. And maybe we'll just go in whatever order. Um, this talk specifically focuses on music, the role that music played in V's practice, not just as a DJ, but across all of the mediums that he worked with. And I think three people here are probably some of his closest collaborators, period, but especially with respect to music. So I wanted to start with asking you guys how you first came to meet V. It was probably at a party, but maybe not. How you came to meet him, and what was the first thing you worked with him on?
Oh, this is kind of loud. Uh, you know what's ironic about the person I met Virgil is that the person I met Virgil through is his cousin who owned a record store in London. And his cousin's name is Tony Tago, and he owned a record store called, what was the name of the store? Benji, do you remember the name of the store, Tony Tago?
Deal Real.
Deal Real, right, that was it. And it was in London. And they owned a record, it was like a hip hop record store, and they used to do Friday sessions. It's actually where I think A-Track and Kanye met for the first time, maybe. And he said to me, "You're gonna get on with my cousin Virgil." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "You guys are very similar in like the way you look at things and approach things and in your taste." And lo and behold, we met and we hung out one night randomly in London, and we went to a club called the Double Club, which was kind of like a nightclub meets a restaurant meets kind of art opening. I think it was owned by Prada, and that literally is how Virgin and I became friends through his cousin who owned a record store. Ended up in a nightclub talking about music, fashion, art, and kind of like from that moment on, it was almost kind of like meant to be.
Yeah, the way I met Virgil was through my radio show. I have a weekly radio show in the UK on the BBC, and it's not an exaggeration to say that Virgil was probably one of the most long-standing listeners to the show. And I would say, like in the mid-2000s, he used to reach out, he used to send messages to the show. I'm not sure through what format, whether it was like email or MySpace or something, but he used to get hold of me and send feedback to the show and say what songs he liked, and then we got talking. And then I also run a club night in the UK, and there were about 2007, 2008, I want to say, he just pulled up one week. Used to happen on a Wednesday night in Commercial Street, and one week he said, "Yeah, I'm coming straight from the airport, we're pulling up," and he came through, and yeah, the musical relationship really developed from there.
Yeah, I think a running theme for the beginning of these relationships is Virgil was a master researcher and like a true walking encyclopedia of so many things. And so I had a menswear brand called Nom de Guerre that from 2003 to 2010 that I certainly met Virgil at some point in that time, but he referenced Nom de Guerre a lot as he started to kind of become known better in his creative practice. And post Nom de Guerre, I went into sort of like a creative hiatus, like a true burnout mode. I just like checked out. I wanted really nothing to do with menswear, just personal stuff, and it was also a time in the industry that I think was really tough. And to be honest, like as Nom de Guerre sort of closed up shop, there was a few years where like I didn't hear from a lot of people that I had creative relationships with. It was like, okay, Devon's clearly gone off, and nobody was really like making an effort to like bring me back into the fold. And I started getting some people started mentioning like, hey, this Virgil has been like referencing you in this or that way, or Virgil wanted to get in touch with you. I gave him your phone number, and I think he just like kind of almost cold called me one day. Was like reintroduce himself and see if I wanted to collaborate in any way, like creatively. And I sort of explained that like I really wasn't interested in going back into menswear at the time. And he was just like, it did not faze him one bit. He was just like, okay, well, what do you want to do? What are you into? I was like, oh, I'm really dedicated to this craft of building audio playback equipment. And it was just like equally as interesting and relevant to him as, you know, if we were going to make graphics together, design clothing together, whatever else it might be. And just being that kind of really broad encyclopedia, he also knew all of my references that really were totally unrelated to fashion. It was the kind of thing that, like, I think a lot of those people that I had long working relationships with from fashion, if I start talking to them about any of this stuff, about vintage all-tech or, you know, like important audio engineering moments throughout the 20th century, their eyes would just like glass over, no interest at all. But Virgil and I just then kind of developed this like pretty intense pen pal relationship of a really diverse range of things: snowboarding, music, audio equipment, DJing, and of course like fashion. And he would send me references to things that I had done more than a decade before that I had completely forgotten about. But he was just a master of collecting information, editing, and holding on to like this incredible library of references. And yeah, that's kind of how our relationship began.
I think a common thread with all three of you is that there was both a friendship there where conversation was a big part of the relationship, and then that bled into working together on various things. So I kind of wanted to ask each of you both about some of the friendship side, but also about the ways you guys worked together, whether informally or formally, the ways you guys showed up to each other's various things. So I think I'd start with Acyde. One of the things that you're most known for is this, I'd call it like a multidisciplinary collective, No Vacancy In, that works across music, art, fashion. You founded with two other people. Virgil wasn't a part of it, but I feel like before I had met any of you guys, I would always see him at No Vacancy things. So can you talk a little bit about your practice with respect to No Vacancy, but also the collaborative relationship you guys seem to have with Virgil?
Yeah, I think it was like a co-conspiracy of trying to figure out how to merge all the things we were interested in and sort of turn them into creative pursuits, but also businesses. And I think his kind of first version or iteration of that for him was maybe like the bin trill thing, right? Or that was the most public version. And for me, probably No Vacancy was a similar thing. Because at a certain point, you know, when you DJ, when you're younger and you kind of don't become a professional DJ, but you're still DJing, it's not what you're primarily known for. But then you work with fashion, but you're not a designer, but you work with fashion. And then you design a little bit. And then, you know, you've got all these sort of like interests. You have to find a way to make them converge. And what I really noticed with him that he was really good at was he would find a sort of name or a brand for all of these interests and then merge them into one thing. And in a way that kind of inspired what I did with No Vacancy with Tremaine and then Brock. And then it was also the time that like we were all traveling a lot. I think because of the sort of early moment of streetwear and fashion merging, and like a lot of American music guys who were hip-hop guys basically becoming really interested in fashion and coming to Paris. I mean, Ivan, who's right there, knows exactly what I'm talking about. That period, it was just like these guys just kept showing up in London, in Paris, London, Paris. And it was almost kind of like, oh, okay, cool. Like, I guess we get each other. And they were also kind of, in a way, because the world was seeing what American rap sort of represented as like the pinnacle of black music in the world. It was just super cool that people like Ivan and Virgil and Kanye were showing up in London and Paris and actually kind of merging their interests with what we were doing over there. And that kind of became really like the friendship and the camaraderie that we sort of developed over time. And then after a while, it just turned into like, okay, well, we're going to do after party for Kanye, so you should play because, you know, you should come to the studio and listen to the music and then see what you think about it and what you want to kind of show as your side of it. And then it turned into, okay, well, I'm doing my Off-White launch in Milan, you should play. And then I'd be like, okay, great. And it just sort of kind of snowballed from there into not really an intentional thing. We never really had a business plan. No one ever really sat down and said, we should turn it into anything beyond just sharing music and just sharing our passion, basically.
You guys went from sort of gate crashers at Fashion Week to actually literally defining the scene musically and culturally or otherwise. And when you reflect on that, do you reflect on that? In the last decade, I think the impact that Ivan, Virgil, you guys, Heron had literally sort of shaped a generation of fashion through music. Like, people didn't play rap music 10 years ago or weird jazz.
Yeah, no,
Right.
you know what? It was, I guess there's a part of it that was quite deliberate, right? You know, Virgil and I definitely, we would speak about certain genres of music and certain artists that we liked and how we could kind of use the platforms that we had or the weird party for, you know, a French fashion brand or this situation in London. We would push that into the middle of that situation. But at the same time, you know, for us, it was just kind of like, I'm trying to really reflect and figure out whether there was any moment where we sat down and it was more than just like, we really like this music and we think other people are going to like it if we share it in these spaces. I think it's so normal now that I just take it for granted that it was always like that. But was it always like that, Benji? Was it like...
I think you never go in with the intention of changing something. You're just doing what you do. And then the sort of room changes around you over time, and then you look up and realize that things have changed. But the attitude is always the same. I don't think there was like I think one thing was a sort of mission to try and do everything that we did without a level of compromise on taste or music, but not coming from any snobby angle about like we're coming with an elevated point of view. More like, we know what we like. We know that we can bring that into a space where it previously hasn't been around a lot. And as long as we stay true to the sort of codes of what we know makes a good party or makes a good atmosphere or, you know, records that we love, it was all coming from a place of passion. And so it was kind of a pure intention. When you go into things with that, usually you find that that's reflected back to you after time.
You know, I just thought of something very quickly. Sorry, I just got to say this while I remember it. I think when I was younger, the thing I hated the most was looking at a fashion magazine and never seeing, like, black people in it. And then looking at, like, hip-hop magazines and never seeing fashion stuff. It was just kind of like streetwear. Do you know what I mean? Or looking at skate magazines and it was, like, one type of person. And I think when I met Benji, when I was younger, when I met Virgil, I think the thing that we all had in common is we liked all of these things, and we didn't understand why they were separate entities or why they were rooms where, like, one thing wasn't allowed. And I think secretly we had a thing in the back of our head, maybe even a chip on our shoulder, where we were like, we're just gonna smash all of it together. Because to me, that was always the most interesting thing, was to have like hip hop people in the room listening to James Blake for the first time and being like, what the hell am I listening to? Like, to me, that was always the most interesting thing. Or having James Blake in a room and him hearing like a Mobb Deep record and just being like, this is crazy. And I think so, and that's what Benji's radio show represented. And I think that's kind of, in a way, what our friendship and the companionship, that's what we shared. We wanted to smash all of the genres and all of the mediums and all of the platforms and all of the spaces and influences that we had. We felt like they should be in the same room at the same time. Yeah, that was something I just remembered.
100%. And as I look at these images of clubs, it's just come to mind in real time that, you know, most friends and collaborators of Virgil, I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I'm pretty confident that we'd all agree that he's the greatest single connector of people that any of us have known. And in a way, his fascination and passion for club culture, nightclub culture, and DJing actually makes total sense when you look at it through that frame, because there is no greater connector of people from different places and backgrounds than nightclubs and music scenes. And also, Virgil had a great passion and love for the history of British club culture and music from the UK. And I think that that might be also connected to the fact that, you know, the UK has always had a tradition of the smashing together of things, like so that music genres in the UK would bring together people from different classes, different backgrounds, and they would all congregate sort of under the musical space, in a club space. So I'm seeing a direct connection between these images and the desire to connect people. And actually, what greater way to connect people in a nightclub or at Paris Fashion Week or in Chicago or in London or wherever than inviting them to the party, inviting them to the club. And I feel that that's like a commonality that we've shared over, and probably I wouldn't have met Acyde if it wasn't for nightclubs. And so
we met outside of a nightclub.
Yeah, exactly. But
there's also just an incredible loyalty to interests and people that predated his, level of influence being there to really pull people in and put them on a pedestal.
Oh, for sure.
There was like at no point that he, anyway, in my experience, there were plenty of moments in his career where I was like, I'm gonna kind of like I'm gonna start getting pushed to like a back burner due to just the amount of people he has access to now. But the most incredible sense of loyalty to the people who had, I think, contributed to him becoming the creative he was by that point.
No, I was just looking at the CDJs and realizing what a difference there is between being in love with the idea of something and actually being in love with it. Like Virgil wasn't in love with the idea of being a DJ. He was in love with DJing. You know, there was never a time where you'd find him not ready to put a USB stick in, no matter what he'd done that day. And often, we'd be the ones that were kind of motivated to do a party because he'd be the dynamo of energy that'd say, no, we're doing a party tonight. And that immediate expression of creativity, of mixing two things together to make a third, I think, is a key part of the talk. Because, not to jump in front of your question, but I'm just looking at the mixer and I just want to remember a quote that Virgil said. I don't want to misquote him, so I'm not going to get it exactly right, but he said something to me along the lines of, he considers that the greatest contribution to art is the DJ mixer. And anyone that knows Virgil knows that he had like an addiction to buying DJ mixers. He was like really into, if you went to his house or his atelier or his office or wherever he worked, there'd always be a new DJ mixer. And I think that apart from being design objects that he loved to look at, the functionality of it, I think, is important to recognize in Virgil's practice, which is the idea of mixing two things together to make a third. And maybe, I don't want to speak for Virgil, but maybe that's one of the contributing factors to why he considers it one of the most important art pieces. I mean, certainly he had mixers in his spaces that I'd go into displayed as if they were design pieces that you could go and buy here today, you know? And it's kind of important to look at this image and realize how central the idea of mixing was to Virgil's practice across all of his disciplines, in my opinion.
But you know, something that just occurred to me, it's just literally as you were saying that, and I was kind of staring at this guy, and then I was kind of like going through like a mental process of trying to understand the thought I was having, and I just thought about the fact that, like, obviously, you know, Virgil's sort of taste in music and his DJing bled into his design work, and his design work bled into his DJing. But then something that occurred to me was like, obviously, you started off as a clothing guy, right? You started off as nom de guerre. And I think for a generation of us, and most of the people in this room maybe, or a generation that pretty much have the same taste, it's almost impossible to trust a fashion designer who's not into music. I always think about why people like Raf Simons so much, right? Like, this guy, Rhys Cooper, right? He's a young designer. I met him in a nightclub, and this is literally true. I am not making this up. I met this guy in a nightclub in London, and now he designs clothes for a living, you know, and he told me he was going to do it at that time. And you worked in clothing, and you moved into, well, I guess, design through technology and sound. So I think there's something to be said for a type of person. There's like a synonymous street that runs through people who have really specific taste in style and fashion and in music. And, you know, that goes as far back as even jazz, right? Like, there's a certain way that people dressed. And I think Virgil even said this once. He was like, you know, when you think of, like, all your favorite groups from an era and you name their names, you automatically see what they look like, style-wise. If you say Public Enemy, everyone knows exactly what they look like. If you say Nirvana, everyone knows exactly what they look like. If you say the Beatles, everyone knows exactly what they look like. Like, there's something to be said for people who are really quite clear-minded about what type of music they're into and what type of style they're into. Sorry, it just struck me as a thought. Just,
No, to that point, I remember having a conversation with Virgil at one point early on when discussing like my audio work, and I really saw them as totally separate practices. And Virgil wanted to start like building bridges to connect the different interests that I had and bring them, because our first proper collaboration was graphics for his first women's collection. And we had developed a friendship for years before doing that or any other like creative collaboration. And he wanted to start bringing the audio stuff into the mix with all the rest of the stuff. And I told him, I'm really apprehensive about doing this because, for your reason exactly, I had studied audio engineering when I was young, building audio systems and equipment had been like my personal work the whole time I was in fashion. But as I decided to like step back from designing clothing and just focus on the audio stuff for my personal growth, I told him, like, I don't want people to know that the guy making this audio stuff was also the guy that designed clothes, because I feel like no one will take me seriously if they're like, oh, this is some fashion designer making like speakers. What's that? What does he know? And he could not have disagreed more strongly. He was just like, you're just thinking about this all wrong. Like, if you just do one thing, you're totally uninteresting to me anyway. Like, the thing that's interesting about you is that your brain is like, you're pushing through all these different channels. You have one creative lens that you're filtering all these things through. And while some of my work is not even, you can't even see it. I'm just designing like the circuit for a tube amplifier. So you could say, oh, but there's one thing that's purely aesthetic, making clothing, and then something that's like purely technical or sonic. But the fact that it's going through that same filter means that it's really one body of work, and there's a continuity between those things. And I owe him a tremendous debt for just kind of like waking me up to that fact that like as long as I'm true to myself, I can trust my own creative process to output work that is me.
Devon, can you talk a bit more about some of the works that you've featured in Virgil's Figures of Speech exhibitions? I think this photo is of Virgil's social sculpture, which is on view right now at the Brooklyn Museum, and it's sort of emblematic of a lot of the themes that we're talking about. It's a work that's grounded in Black vernacular architecture. It's called a social sculpture in reference to boys and the way that communities sort of activate art spaces. And then Devon's audio works are in here, where, again, it kind of points to that relentless multidisciplinarity you guys are talking about, where music isn't just about sonics, but it's also about the designs, the objecthood of the things that kind of play the music. So can you talk about some of your speaker works and how those collaborations came about with V?
Yeah, I mean, if you back up to that, the piece that's in this piece right here, this is the original installation of this work in Chicago at the MCA. I mean, just kind of like a backstory on this specific setup is I had built this pair of speakers years before this show opened. I exhibited them a couple times, but at the time this practice was really handmade, just me and like a friend that would work on it together in terms of the craftsmanship side of it. And I felt like this pair of speakers was sort of like something that I couldn't replicate in terms of its the material, that Douglas fir, marine grade Douglas fir plywood, is a really difficult material to work with for a lot of reasons. One, because it's a construction grade material that's just essentially a commodity type of product. You can't buy like a nice sheet of Douglas fir plywood. There's no source for that. So in order to make an aesthetically beautiful pair of speakers out of this material, you have to just sift through like hundreds of sheets to find the ones you. It just there's no way you could build like a replicable product with this material. And I had already kind of put it behind me and said, this is the only pair that I'll have like this. And Virgil came over to my house, and he was just like, he was very fixated on this pair of speakers. And you know, he was commissioning some speakers for his home at the time. This is before the first. But this is before there was Off-White for women. This is like, I don't know how to like put it into the timeline of things, but from my relationship with him is very early on. And he's like, can you make me a pair of speakers just like these? And I was just like, I just can't. Like, it's just so, I would never, it just takes me so long to do. And he just kept after it for like, you know, a long time, for years, basically. And until he presented me with the opportunity to show work in the MCA show, in the Figures of Speech show. And he was like, basically, can we make this pair of speakers I've been asking you for forever for the show? And I told him I would try. So I spent at least a year working on this pair of speakers. But it was just, I was having constant like setbacks. And I realized that like, I wasn't going to be as happy with them as it was of these. And in that time period, we had done like our collaboration for the Off-White Women's. I think we had also done LV1. I did graphics for the first collection as well. And by that point, I just felt so indebted to him. Like, in terms of a collaborator, just like you said, you never have like a business plan. You don't have a written agreement. You just feel like I want to work with this person. And work is like a stretch of the use of the word, right? You're like, I just want to do something with this person. I don't really care what people think of it. I don't really care the success of its outcome. But then he was just so generous in the way he like gave back to the people he collaborated with. So in the end, I wound up, just using the speakers that for years he'd been asking, and those are the ones that wound up being in that show. And then the piece that you originally asked about, the most recent piece that's in the Brooklyn, inside the social sculpture, was similarly, I went back to that same material. And this was work that we didn't get to work on together. And I just thought, sort of out of an honor to our collaboration and that original material that he loved, and the fact that the concept of the social sculpture was this sort of like perfect imperfection, that it would also allow me to work with that material and not worry too much about the thing looking not like a piece of fine furniture, that it could, in that environment, live in a more like rough-hewn, utilitarian kind of unapologetically embrace that aesthetic. And so that was kind of where that recent work came from.
Thanks so much. Benji, or any of you, I wanted to ask about the musical work at Louis Vuitton. Virgil's spoken before about how when he got the job at LV, his dream job, his first hire was a DJ, was Benji, to be the musical director of LV. Again, which speaks to the centrality, I think, of music across his practice. This is an image of the runway from V's first season at LV. You guys were always part of these LV sound design and record clubs. This is an image of Mos Def and Saul Williams from LV6, which was a film that featured both of them. This is LV4, Cybertron. And then this is a still from LV7, the film that featured Jizza playing chess. Like, what? I still can't believe that happened. Benji, I think we only have 10 minutes left, but I'd love for you to maybe just try to encapsulate, if you can. You could write a book about your work at LV, but I'd love if you could encapsulate,
We hope he does.
That experience.
Yeah, good
This
luck
is the
getting that done in 10 minutes. I don't know what's the question? How do you want me to, what's the entry point to talk about this? Because it's so big. I mean,
tell us a story about one of your favorite shows you work on. Start on this one.
I mean, something that strikes me as you flew through the images is that the beautiful thing about the opportunity of working with Virgil is that we never we never reference stuff if we could go to the source, you know? So a lot of people will see something and they'll have it on their mood board and they'll be like, oh, we want to do something a bit like Futura 2000, who I know you had earlier. It's like, no, we want to call Futura 2000 and invite Futura 2000 to tag the set for LV2 because it's a New York street scene and that's what's authentic for that. Around LV4, which you showed there, you know, Virgil had been listening to a lot of electro. And when I say electro, I don't mean like 2000s French electro. I mean like Detroit electro and kind of early techno. And he was asking me a lot of questions about it at the time. And I was like, well, the pioneers and the originators, of course, is Juan Atkins' Cybertron. And so for that one, we were like, let's go straight to the source and ask Juan Atkins if he would come and reconstruct some of the classics and do it live. So that theme runs throughout everything we do. I mean, if you look at the films that we were doing, it's like, okay, as you know, Chloe, you know, the collaboration was not like, okay, you're the music person, you're the set designer, you're the storyboard. Of course, we all respected our respective lane, but all of our disciplines bled into each other because we all had eyes on everything. So, of course, if you say to me, I want to do a film that references Queen's Gambit, chess, Kung Fu, Shogun's Assassin, I'm like, well, obviously it has to be Jizza. So then we go and speak to Jizza. And the amazing thing about working with someone as brilliant as Virgil Abloh is the fact that anything like that is possible. Like he says, oh, I want to talk about 90s breakbeat metalheads. Tell me what it was like to be in drum and bass clubs in 1998. It's like, well, why don't we go and ask Goldie to be in the film? And somehow we can create a world in which Jizza and Goldie and Lupe Fiasco can all sit in the same film from very, very deep references. And it's a challenge to talk about this in 10 minutes because every single one of these images that you've seen has like layers and layers and layers of nuance. It's very important to communicate that Virgil's work in this space was not like, let's make some beautiful clothes, let's put some cool music on the runway, and let's do a nice set. It was so many codes in every single show. This one in particular we're looking at, I consider as sort of an apex in a way of some of the work that we did. It's called Aim and Break. It's a film that was kind of like enforced to be a film through COVID, because when we were doing live shows at Vuitton, we obviously couldn't do them during lockdown and during COVID. So the first one which he showed was Peculiar Contrast, Perfect Light with Mos Def and Saul Williams. And there's another perfect example of where the references of wordsmiths looking for a poet, thinking about who can represent and bookend this piece. It had to be Yassine and it had to be Saul Williams. And
Where's Sarah?
what's that?
Sarah.
And Sarah is a perfect example. You know, Sarah Creative Partners are a group that Virgil and I spoke about so much in like 2000, mid to late 2000s, basically, as being a real inspiration. And when we did the, which number was that? Shanghai, and that was like 5, yeah. We did like 5.1, 5.2, but we made a film, and the reference for that was Sarah Creative Partners. And we were like, who is making music like Sarah Creative Partners right now? No one. Why don't we ask them to get back together and make a record? So we booked out Shangri-La, which is Rick Rubin's studio in Malibu, and got them to congregate again and make music for this. So, I mean, I don't want to shower you with every name that we've worked with, but the codes that go through each one of these shows, I could sort of write an essay on every single thing. I mean, even the veining and the marbling on that picture there, the great thing and the great privilege about working in music, but being able to observe the multidisciplinary kind of approach of Virgil is that he would throw me into the sandpit with someone who's arguing over what the veining of the marble should be like for basically a week. And so I'm looking at the WhatsApp group and realizing that at that time, what's that show? Succession was on, and there's a scene in Succession where they're going to the Supreme Court and they're walking down the steps of the Supreme Court, and that's the exact marble that was in that was screenshotted to go. You know, it's like that level of depth, right? But I think the important thing to recognize about Virgil in this space is that I consider him a master of frequency, really, because we all know that he vibrated at like the highest frequency no matter what happened. But if you think about like a chord, as I'm looking at this now, if you think about a chord or a chord that makes you feel good in your taste, like on the piano, everyone's different. They all have their own taste, but that's just a combination of frequencies, which is what all art is, right? Color is frequency, you know, communication is frequency, but he understood how to put all these frequencies together to make these chords that just kind of resonated to a certain generation that had certain references. We're a very similar age, you know, apart by just a few years, and I think that Acyde, Devon are the same. We come from sample culture era people, right? So a lot of this work is about sampling things, whether it be a building or, as you said, a Mobb Deep record or a particular shoe that Acyde was wearing that day. And, you know, that cocktail would always end up in the show. I don't know if that answers your question. I could answer it more straightforwardly, which is to say that for the Louis Vuitton shows, we were fortunate to always work with live music. And I think that I'm not sure what approach Virgil had in his other disciplines, but we always, whatever we did, whether it was like DJing or this, we always had a kind of manifesto of what we wanted to do. And with Louis Vuitton, live music was central to that. But I will finish this answer to your question by just saying it's all just DJing. And the training ground for this was the DJ booth shared with Virgil on countless thousands of hours in countless nightclubs, also with Acyde. And, you know, people ask me, oh, music direction, how do I get into that? Well, it's just DJing. It's just the same, exact same thing. It's just the context is different because DJing is the central discipline to how we bonded. I would argue that music is probably the most central discipline in terms of Virgil's world. I mean, everyone free to argue away, but for me, that's true. And like doing a show is really just about knowing which character to put in which scene of the movie, i.e. which record to play at which moment in the night. Why does this record sound perfect at 11 p.m. but would be terrible at 3 a.m. and so on? And know your audience, know your crowd, know your context. So that's my attempt at answering in under 10 minutes.
I think we have time for one more question or comment. Acyde, what are you thinking about?
I'm looking at your shoes.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about your shoes the whole time we've been here, to be honest with you. Why haven't I seen those yet?
They're good, right? They're good.
Yeah, no, they're pretty good. No, I mean, I think we were all very blessed to have obviously come into contact with Virgil through all these different practices, but I think I am going back to that thought about I really do not trust fashion designers who aren't deeply into music. And I think that if you're going to buy clothes from anyone, if they're not deeply into music, don't buy their clothes. Think about this. Undercover, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Ralph Simmons, like, maybe Ralph Lauren's the exemption, because I don't know what he listens to. Country and Western, maybe. But I just think that, like, he was the guy who realized it the best, and the original thought I had about skate culture and hip-hop culture and being into fashion and being into clothes and being into graphics. I think, like, when you look at the work that Benji's talking about with Louis Vuitton, or when you look at some of the stuff we did with Devon, where he pulled Devon back into graphics, but they ended up making equipment, and Devon used to work solely in fashion. I think it sort of gives you the 360 culmination of, like, our friend and who we're talking about, but also really about all of us understanding how to harness our powers in the best way. Because I think people try and push us all into singularity because it's the easiest way to understand someone. It's just, oh, you just do that thing, right? And then they say, oh, you're kind of a fake at that, or you're not the greatest at that. And Virgil was just very smart to work with people who were either as good as him or better than him at that thing. And then he became really good at that thing. And I think that's the lesson in all of this, you know?
But low-key was mentoring all of us in how to be the best versions of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an incredible gift to everyone I know that Virgil touched in the creative realm, is really being able to see the great in what you're doing when you can't see it, and being able to teach you of how to bring that out in your practice by being mentored by him without even realizing it was happening, is something that I keep realizing as time is passing, even just sitting here watching the Harvard lecture. You know, he really did mentor us all.
Can you hear me? Okay, perfect note to end on. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you, Devon, Benji, Acyde. Super grateful. Thank you, guys.